Hello everyone and welcome to my second annual Top 10 Movies of the Year video, this year being 2015. So this will be the second time I have done one of these. First one went over rather well and I had a fun time doing it. I thought I'd do it again. There were a lot of controversial, I guess there will be a lot of controversial movies on this list this year. There was a lot of hype. A lot of the hype didn't deliver. Some of the hype did deliver. Some of the movies that are on this list I was not expecting to be good. Some of these I had never heard of until I went to see them. But before we get into the list, there are some boilerplates that need to be gotten out of the way. First of all, I did not get to see every movie this year. I got to see more than I usually do. Usually there is a list of movies that I end up putting in my phone of movies that I missed and I didn't get to see. This year, I don't think I have any movies that I wanted to see that I missed, but that doesn't mean I saw everything. There are a lot of movies that I did not see simply because I was not interested. And then, of course, you have the limited releases that come out in December every year. This year, the big ones being Revenant and The Hateful Eight. These are being released worldwide in January, so maybe you'll see them in the 2016 list, who knows. Second boilerplate, this is a completely subjective list. Alright, you are very likely to not share my opinions on a lot of these. Alright, so instead of flaming me in the comments section for not agreeing with your opinion, how about we try to have a discussion as far as what your favorite movies were this year, right? I'd love to have that discussion with you guys, so if we could just keep it clean in the comments section below, that would be fantastic. Alright, moving on to the list, the reason we are all here right now, starting off with number 10. At number 10 we have Concussion, Concussion being the Will Smith vehicle about a man from Nigeria who immigrated to America, became a doctor who does autopsies, and discovered the whole CET, I believe was the acronym, the concussion issue over with the NFL, and went to war with that organization in a manner of speaking. There's a lot to like in this movie. The characters are very well done, and like they're very likable. The writing is engaging, it's gripping. The characters are well rounded, and you get attached to them, at least early on. However, as the movie progresses, there are a lot of time skips. A lot of characters that had fleshing out early on become more one-dimensional. We don't get to see too much of them later on because they don't have much to do with the story, but they were a part of our investment, and so it makes the whole movie feel a little bit directionless at times. Hence why this movie is at number 10. At number 9, we have Bridge of Spies. Bridge of Spies being the Tom Hanks vehicle. It's another movie based on a true story. This one is about the Cold War. America catches a spy. Russia also catches a spy. Tom Hanks has to defend the Russian spy in court. And that ends up negotiating a trade between the two. Complications ensue. It's a Tom Hanks movie. It's very well acted, very well written, very gripping. Two things need to be addressed with this movie. The first is actually something that also ties into Concussion, so I'm going to do this one first. Both Concussion and Bridge of Spies are very emotionally involved. By that I mean they are also very emotionally draining. Which means, as much as you might enjoy them, it's hard to go back and watch them again because you don't necessarily feel like going through that a second time, right? I'm not saying I'm not going to watch these movies again. I probably will at some point, but I don't feel compelled to do it over and over again, right? Even if I enjoyed them. Now, the second thing, this one is about Bridge of Spies in particular. While a lot of the movie is very well written and very well directed, there's even some good comedy in there. The comedy, there's like two different types of comedy in Bridge of Spies, and some of it works really well. It's dry. It's almost ironic. It's a humor that exists by addressing the humorlessness of the situation. It's more, not humorlessness, it addresses the humanity of the situation, right? You've got people who would normally say, like, who would normally stress themselves out to the point of going gray in the head, trying to change their circumstances. Then you've got the Russian spies, like the definitive example of this. He's just a guy who just, if that's what's meant to happen, that's what's meant to happen. There's nothing I can do about it. And this, that flat honesty is so refreshing against the backdrop of the rest of the movie that's just trying to constantly alter this massive wave of circumstance that is the Cold War. Not saying that needed to be, I'm not saying that that didn't need to be dealt with. It's just the differing perspectives cause a really unique style of humor that you're not expecting. However, there's also another type of humor in this movie. It's not very common, it's not in there a lot, which is good, but every now and then you'll have a character show up who isn't well explained as to why they're there. They don't end up doing much of anything, and they're acting like a cartoon. The way they move, the way they talk, it's like they're from like a 90s Disney movie, a 90s Disney animated movie. The way they move, the way they talk, it's ridiculous. You can't take it seriously. It breaks all of the immersion in those scenes. You just mentally check out when they're happening, and it's jarring too. It's not subtle at all. Now, again, there aren't very many of these things. There aren't many at all. But they are there. And this issue, compiled with the issue that I talked about before, is why it is number 9. It is more enjoyable than Concussion, right? It has a lot more humor to it than Concussion did. But at the same time, it's still, one, really emotionally draining, and two, very bizarre at some points. Easily the most bizarre movie I've seen all year. At number 8, we have Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. So Mission Impossible Rogue Nation is what I have come to call the Avengers of the Mission Impossible movies. This is the movie where all of the big stars who have been in the previous movies are finally in a cohesive team together for the first time, really, because Luther wasn't really in Ghost Protocol much, except for that one scene at the end. They've got all the banter you'd expect, you've got the conflict, you've got the tension, but you've also got, again, the fun, witty dialogue, the Mission Impossible stunts we've all come to expect, come to know. And again, the acting is on point, everything about it is very top of the line Mission Impossible for the franchise in general. Not to say that it's my favorite in the series, but as far as what we typically get from a Mission Impossible, this is the best of its kind. That being said, the Mission Impossible franchise is starting to show its flaws a little more as the movies progress. What was once a refreshing element to its production is now starting to hamper it. And in my opinion, this has been hampering it for a long time, but it's a lot more visible now than it used to be. And that is that it changes directors all the time. Right? They don't actually, the movies don't actually tie into each other. Now, you can say that they do because they reference some events from the previous movies, and that is true, they do, but those are just references. They don't actually influence the plot at all, which wouldn't be a bad thing by itself if previous movies didn't leave dangling plot threads to be resolved, right? If you're going to do that, it just alleviates so much tension. There's so much less tension than there otherwise would be, right? Imagine how much better this movie would have been if the Rogue Nation, let's say, actually felt like a nation, because we got to see them do things in the previous movies that demonstrated their influence, their power. On the same note, they keep bringing in different female actresses, right? Instead of, say, bringing back Julia from Mission Impossible 3, the character that we are probably the most invested in out of the female protagonists, they keep bringing in new characters, so it's impossible to get invested into them. The character in Rogue Nation, whose name I don't even remember, I couldn't invest in her, because even though we know now that she's coming back in the next movie, we had no indication of that while watching the movie, because every other female protagonist they've introduced has been a one-trick pony that hasn't come back. So it's everything is there to make it good, but it could have been so much better, and that's been the case with a lot of Mission Impossible movies up to this point. Really, that's been the case with all of them, with the exceptions of 1 and 3. Well, even 3, really. So the only one that is the exception of this is 1, and it's starting to show. And I hope that they're able to learn from this for the next one. Because as much as I enjoy the Mission Impossibles, I can see myself not going to see another one in the future. Now, ultimately, this movie was very fun. I enjoyed watching it, but again, as you can tell, there isn't a lot of substance here, which is a trend in the remainder of this half of the top 10, with number 7 being Jurassic World. Now, Jurassic World has everything you would expect from a fun summer blockbuster. It's got good dialogue, it has witty, humorous dialogue, it has good action, it has cool fights between the dinosaurs, cool stunts, I guess. The dinosaurs perform cool stunts, both with the other dinosaurs and interacting with the humans. The story is gripping, in a sense, in the monster movie kind of way. The one thing that I love about Jurassic World, though, is that it takes the Hammond ideal demonstrated in Jurassic Park 1, right? And we assumed that it was a bad idea. We assumed that the park that he was trying to do in Jurassic Park 1 was a bad idea. But we didn't realize just how bad it would be. And this movie got to show us that, which is awesome. It changes... It's a special kind of movie that is both enhanced by the movie that came before it and enhances that movie. So both of these movies assist each other, making them both stronger for it, right? Giving context to both of them. Now, unfortunately, that's about all it was. It was very fun, very enjoyable, but there were also characters that I felt like the movie was treating them as though they were already established in like a TV series, kind of like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., going alongside it, when that wasn't the case. I'm mostly talking about the technicians behind Jurassic World. The way they were set up, there were jokes they were telling that felt like inside jokes that we, the audience, weren't involved with, because we don't know these characters as well as the movie is acting like we should. So, yeah. Fun movie. I own it. I bought the collector's edition with the statue, and I don't regret it at all. And I did enjoy it, and I will probably watch it again. And capping off the first half of the list, we have Avengers Age of Ultron. Now, Avengers Age of Ultron, again, it's the second Avengers movie. We get to see all the Avengers come back. Admittedly, the beginning threw me for a loop a little bit because it ties into the end of Captain America 2, not the end of Guardians of the Galaxy, which makes me question why Guardians of the Galaxy came out before Age of Ultron, but oh well, that doesn't matter. So, with that one confusion out of the way, Age of Ultron is a very good movie when it's with the Avengers. Now, unfortunately, there are times when it is not with the Avengers. Unfortunately, there are times when we are forced to basically stop the plot to study Ultron, to get to know his character. Now, I am not saying that we shouldn't know his character. We should get to know him, but it should have been done prior to this. I'm hesitant to make this a flaw for Age of Ultron, because it isn't really. It's more a flaw for another movie that didn't pull its weight in Phase 2. That would be Iron Man 2, right? It's the only movie in Phase 2 that didn't actually contribute to the MCU as a whole, right? Instead of taking the time to at least introduce the ideas behind Ultron, to introduce, the base programming at least for him, so that we can get to know his character. Maybe even have snippets of his AI learning and growing during Iron Man. It would have been Iron Man 3, not Iron Man 2, sorry. But anyway, you have that happening during Iron Man 3, right? It doesn't even have to influence the plot. It's something on the side. Then you have Age of Ultron, where he would get the body, and, well, he would snap, he'd get the body, and then the plot of Age of Ultron would ensue. But we wouldn't need the fleshing out of his character in the movie, and we could spend more time with the Avengers, instead of having to spend time on Ultron when it shouldn't be necessary. As much as I hate putting that on the shoulders of Age of Ultron, I don't really have a choice. Other than that, though, the dialogue is top-notch, the action is fantastic, and again, the comedy, the banter between them is hilarious as always. Although I will say there is a point where the plot is a little unfocused. It does focus up at the end, and there is also a bizarre romance that kind of makes sense, but also comes out of nowhere, between Natasha Romanoff and the Hulk. So, it's a fun movie, but again, it lacks substance. It's got more substance than the other two, because we do have genuine moments of character development and characterization, especially when it comes to the hallucinations that Scarlet Witch pulls out. But there were also some significant flaws in the movie, which is why Age of Ultron is number 6. Same spot Guardians of the Galaxy was last year. Huh. Alright, at number 5. Now, if you're following me on Twitter, you'll know that when I came home from seeing Concussion, I said on Twitter that it was probably going to outrank Star Wars. Now, this is just proof positive that I need to stop assuming things about my top 10 lists before I compile them. I did the same thing last year with Guardians of the Galaxy. So I sat down, I wrote up the list, and while Star Wars is not number 1, I knew it wouldn't be. Star Wars The Force Awakens is indeed the first in the top 5 for this year. Star Wars The Force Awakens, for a long time after seeing the movie, I didn't know how to look at it. I didn't know how to treat it, because there were things in it that didn't feel right to me. Like, Han Solo doesn't feel like Han Solo to me. a lot of the things just feel like a lot of the things are really just over exaggerated versions of things that happen in A New Hope. This is true. Whether you like that or not isn't really relevant. The fact is, a lot of plot points are repeated, and I don't like that. That felt lazy, especially when the entire reason behind ejecting the expanded universe was for creativity. Right, so the whole thing just felt very fanboyish, if I'm being honest. But at the same time, the acting was very well done. The setting for the new planets and the new elements to the setting were very well established. They were very fleshed out. The character dialogue was unique. It was different, very well written. The new characters, again, very fleshed out, very well written, very well done. I enjoyed all of the new stuff, but at the same time, it didn't feel like Star Wars to me. Until I realized something. Once I came to this conclusion, everything just made a lot more sense to me. And that is that Star Wars Episode 7 is a very expensive, very well-made fanfiction. Now, go ahead, flame me in the comments. Actually, no, don't flame me in the comments. Keep it clean in the comments. But just, I know, you're probably not watching the video anymore. You're probably clicked away at this point. But it's true. It is very well made. It is very well acted. It is very well written. But Han Solo is not Han Solo. He's Harrison Ford. C-3PO isn't there to actually service the plot. He's there because he's C-3PO, and what would a Star Wars movie be without C-3PO? You know, Leia is almost completely superfluous, minus her one scene with Han. You know, most of the good stuff in this movie is the stuff that they created themselves, which really just made the movie feel like it wasn't a Star Wars movie. But, again, it was still very well made, it was very well done, I will probably buy it. But it still just didn't feel like Star Wars to me, which is why it is at number 5. Number 4 is a movie in a series I haven't actually seen very many of. In fact, I've only seen the first movie in this series. Wasn't a huge fan of the first movie the first time I saw it. I like it a little more now. I rewatched it before going in to see this movie. This movie being Creed. Yes, Creed is my number 4. The dialogue is both engaging, gripping, emotionally involving, and still humorous. I still enjoyed it. I was still able to laugh while also being engaged in the movie. Again, the new characters are interesting. I wanted to know more, right? They were presented in such a way that I wanted to know more, and I knew there were more details there. You know, this movie was a little bit like Concussion in that there are a lot of characters that are well presented at the beginning that don't end up actually having to do a lot with the plot and therefore get abandoned. Now, thankfully, this movie manages to actually maintain its course, maintain its vision, not get distracted, and not be as directionless as Concussion. It still manages to be a cohesive film, but at the same time, you have characters that I feel like could have had awesome character moments as opposed to just kind of being forgotten. Now, again, because these are side characters, it doesn't influence the movie as a whole, but at the same time, right, like I was saying before, I rewatched Rocky 1 before going to see this movie. Rocky 1, right, has 2 boxing matches in the entire movie, and the majority of the training for the second boxing match, the one at the end, is in one montage scene. The majority of Rocky 1 is character moments. You have more boxing matches in Creed than in the first 15 minutes than in the entirety of Rocky 1. which just makes me feel like it could have been optimized better, right? It's still really good. It's still really awesome, really well balanced. I will be buying it when it comes out. I will definitely be able to rewatch it. It's something that I'm looking forward to. It's just a shame that we didn't get to see more, right? It's really almost a praise to have characters that you know there's more there. You saw everything there. You soaked everything up, and you wanted more because you know there's more there because they're that well written. Speaking of good writing, at number 3, we have The Martian. Now, The Martian, I was not expecting what we got. I was expecting basically Gravity meets Interstellar meets Castaway kind of situation. Something very depressing, very dreary, very cold and solitary. That is not what we got at all. Now, not only is there multiple characters in the movie, right? Not only do we get to see what's happening on Earth and on the ship at the same time, right? That does alleviate the solitude, the loneliness that I was expecting. But the big thing, the thing I was absolutely not expecting from this movie was the comedy. Yes, that's right. For those of you who have not been, who've been in the dark when it comes to The Martian, this movie is hilarious. Now, it's still realistic. It's one of those movies you get out and you forget that it's not based off a true story. If someone told you that there was a project that had people going to Mars and it was really based off a true story, the way this movie was presented, you'd believe it. This movie alone presents it as though it is something that actually happened, which adds to the immersion of it, right? You have characters, while a lot of them are one-dimensional, they are still nevertheless engaging. What we do get to see from them is enough for us to care about their feelings, about their emotions, about what they want out of a situation. And then there's Matt Damon, who is, again, hilarious. You would expect someone in his situation to be depressed and maybe determined to survive against the odds, kind of like a Commander Shepard situation. But no, this guy, while he is determined to survive, he almost takes a Chris Pratt from Guardians of the Galaxy approach to it. You know, we've got the music, which isn't his, but you get the point. We've got the more upbeat music playing most of the time, and his bizarre skill set coming into play. A combination of skill sets, really. A bizarre combination of the skill sets coming to play that would help him survive this horrible situation. And again, this movie is surprisingly upbeat while still being able to be immersive and realistic. And just that combination, that blend, just makes the movie so easy to go back to. And I cannot wait for this movie to come out on the 12th so I can buy the crap out of it so that I can watch it again. Yes, please. Number 2 and number 1. It's interesting. This year, a lot of lists, a lot of top 10s for movies, right? You hear these stories. People say that the top half of the list, even especially the top 3 or even the top 2, could interchange, and it was hard to decide, hard to determine. Even me with last year's list was like that. But this year that wasn't the case. This year I actually had issues with the bottom. This year I had issues determining the order for Concussion and Bridge of Spies. Now, as you can tell by this list, I did come to a definitive decision. Now, I say this because what I have for number 2 and number 1, I basically knew. After coming out of seeing this movie, I basically knew it was going to be number 2, and I knew what was going to be number 1. You know, And this lasted for a majority of the year. I wanted other movies to beat these. I wanted to see movies surpass these, but at the same time, these movies were so awesome, and it's not really surprising that they lasted this long. Number 2, I'm going to stop holding you in suspense, is Mad Max Fury Road. Now, I am not a fan of the Mad Max series at all. I have not enjoyed any of the films in the series that I have seen, with the exception of this one. However, this one is probably one of the best written movies I have ever seen. One of the best directed movies I have ever seen as far as setting building. The characters are not that great, I'll freely admit that. But the setting, the level of detail put into the setting for this movie is incredible. And it's subtle, too. If you want to switch your brain off and just watch a mindless action movie, you can do that with Fury Road, but you don't have to. If you want to analyze it, there are plenty of things to analyze. Right? Like the cult that, I don't remember the guy's name, had going with the War Boys, and the way he kept control over the people with the War Boys, and how he kept the War Boys going, and just that whole culture that's there is fascinating, on top of, you know, how Furiosa ties into it, because she's an anomaly too, if you really think about it. Like, her character, what we get to see, what is clearly shown, raises some interesting questions about the society that's there, and they are questions that can be answered if we speculate, if based on the other things that we see. One of my favorite examples of the subtlety of the directing and the writing is the fact that the women, I can't remember what they were called, the wives, I guess, of the cult leader, were the mothers of the War Boys, which you might say that's a duh, which when you say it like that, it kind of is, but when you watch it, it's not actually presented that way, right? You don't actually clue in that the full-grown War Boys are their children, which, again, is nauseating and disturbing, but it also adds, again, another layer of complexity and some information, whether it's too much information or not is debatable, to the society as a whole, right? The fact that the War Boy that ends up joining the crew is the son of the redheaded woman. That kind of connection, not only is it interesting from a cultural perspective, from a character perspective, it puts both of them in a very interesting situation. Bizarre and disturbing, yes, but still interesting, considering it's in regards to its uniqueness. Then, of course, there's the fact that another one of my favorite examples of the subtlety in the writing is the pregnant woman. They never say she's pregnant. They go out of their way to say it after the fact, once, but up to that point, never. It's never stated outright. No words, and it's not even. They don't even use a different word to describe it like they do with so many things. Right? It's just a pan shot shows up that shows multiple women. It also shows her, who is pregnant, obviously. And they don't have to say anything. There isn't even emphasis there. When her water breaks, they don't say anything then either. It's just the way it's shown, the visual storytelling in this movie is fantastic. And you don't see that very often. I haven't seen anything like it this year. Now, unfortunately, again, the characters themselves aren't fleshed out as much as I would like, especially the title character. But outside of that is ultimately small in comparison to how incredible some of the things in this movie are. Which is bizarre because we're talking about the title character not having characterization, but we're also talking about some pretty heavy-hitting things over on the positive side. Things that I don't think I've ever seen in a movie before. Which is why Fury Road gets number 2. Now, number 1. We're down to the last one, are we? Number 1 is a movie I have seen 8 times this year. Yes, really. I have seen this movie 8 times over the course of the year. Well, I guess it was last year now because it's 2016 now. So over the course of 2015, I saw this movie 8 times. I was never bored by this movie. It is the definition of balance between substance and enjoyment. Right? If you want to switch your brain off and just watch a mindless action movie with a good soundtrack, with good action, witty dialogue, you can do that. But if you want to start analyzing it, if you want to analyze almost any of the characters in this movie, if you want to watch this movie from any of the characters' perspectives, then Kingsman, the Secret Service, allows you to do that. I have analyzed so many of the characters in this movie. I have watched it from so many different characters' perspectives. I've watched it from, well, obviously there's Eggsy's perspective, there's Harry Hart's perspective, Arthur's perspective, Valentine's perspective, although my personal favorite would probably be Gazelle's perspective, though Eggsy's mom's is a fun perspective to take as well. And the fact that I can do that, and it fundamentally changes how you intake the information. And the fact, too, that there are characters that, on the face of it, don't actually get much screen time, but they get so much characterization. My favorite example of this would be Gazelle, easily. Right? We don't actually get to see much of her character. We don't get to see her that much, minus the action scenes and some intimidation moments. But the level of characterization she gets in those scenes is fantastic. Now, it's all implied. None of it is stated outright. So we are left to assume, we are left to extrapolate, we are left to pull out her character on our own. But the fact that the movie allows you to do that, and not just with her, with all of them, she's just the most glaring example, is fantastic. And all of this is ignoring the themes. You can watch this movie from the thematic perspectives as well, which, again, the thematic symmetry throughout the movie is amazing. Right now, yes, the last scene before the end credit scene is awkward and unnecessary and just completely pointless drivel, but after that you have the end credit scene, which is probably my favorite end credit scene ever. I have not seen a better end credit scene than that one, because of the thematic significance. At that point, the character arc of Eggsy has gone full circle. Not full circle. He's finished that arc. He has come back to where he was initially, taking all of the stuff that he gained on the journey to that moment, and it just, you don't get to see that kind of symmetry, right? Is it fake? Yeah, sure. But not only is the movie engaging on the front of the fun action movie premise, but it's also engaging from the character perspective, and the multiple amounts of perspectives you can take to watch this movie allows you to watch it so many different times without getting bored. Funny story, This movie was initially going to be released in summer of 2014, for those of you who were not aware. And I had been watching the trailers up to that point. I was excited for it. And then it got delayed to February of 2015. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware of exactly what that usually means, but for those of you who don't know, let me just lay it out for you. Typically, when a movie gets delayed to January or February of the year, they're moving it to die, because they're not expecting it to do well, because they're not expecting it to be good, and typically that just means the movie's going to be terrible. And the trailers they started releasing started to show some things that made me question whether the movie was going to be good or not. At one point I questioned whether or not I'd even go, but eventually I decided to go to check it out, just to give it the benefit of the doubt, right? Just to see, just to make sure. And yeah, it ended up being my #1 film of the year. That was an awesome theater experience. It wasn't my first film of the year, because again, this was February. I saw movies in January. Actually, Taken 3 was my first film of the year. Yes, really. No, I'm not doing a top 10 worst list. I haven't seen that many movies I didn't like. But anyway, yeah, that was my first experience with Kingsman. I walked out of the theater, and that was the best experience in the theater that I had all year. Easily. Hands down, no question. And again, I ended up seeing it in the theater about 4 times total. And then I watched it on Blu-ray about 4 times between Blu-ray and Netflix. So, yeah. And again, never got bored. If for some reason you haven't checked out Kingsman, absolutely, go check it out, because it's an amazing movie. And I highly recommend it. The more I think about it, the more I think it deserves to be placed among my all-time favorite films. Now, I'm not going to be a fanboy and say it doesn't have flaws. It does. There are characters that don't get the characterization they should. But that's basically it. Well, that and the last scene that was completely pointless. But other than those 2 things, that's it. It's an amazing movie that I absolutely recommend. I am very proud to own the Steelbook copy of this movie. And that concludes my top 10 movies of 2015. So what were your top movies of the year? Let me know in the comments below. Let's try to have a discussion about this. I'm interested. I'm curious to know. A lot of you are probably going to say Star Wars, but I'm okay with that. I understand that. It's a very popular movie. It's a very common choice for #1. It's, again, not my pick. I have it at #5, but what is your top pick for the year? I'm, again, looking forward to it. Let's have the discussion in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in my content, subscribe to my channel. I have a Twitch account that I am going to be using a little more regularly from this point on. It's all under the same name, Shurue. And then I also have a Twitter where I post updates involved in that Twitch account. That Twitter is SHURUE_. So if you're interested in being more connected with my content, you can find me at those sources. And until then, I'll see you next time.